Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we are unpacking a seriously fascinating, incredibly complex, and, let's be honest, often deeply misunderstood topic in Islamic jurisprudence. Relying directly on the rigorous research of Professors Hashim Kamali and Mohammed Al-Masari, we're going to dive straight into the foundational texts, the timelines, and the linguistic evidence to truly wrap our heads around this subject.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We're going to hit the traditional viewpoint, redefine some core concepts like deen, contrast high treason with personal belief, explore the voices of classical jurists, and finally, wrap up with the modern consensus. Let's get right into it.
Section 1, the traditional viewpoint and the origin of the ḥudūd interpretation.
So to really grasp this debate, we've got to start right at the foundation. Historically, a lot of classical jurists interpreted one very specific piece of textual evidence as requiring a head, a fixed prescribed punishment. And it all really hinges on this famous hadith. Whoever changes his deen, then kill him. Now, if you just read that at surface level, completely stripped of its surrounding historical or linguistic context, it absolutely sounds like it mandates a severe punishment for simply changing your religion, right? But as we know, pulling a single sentence out of a vastly different era rarely gives us the whole picture.
Moving on to Section 2, redefining deen and allegiance in the early Islamic state.
To actually understand that stark source text, we kind of need to put on our detective hats and travel back to Medina. We've got to redefine our core vocabulary here. Today, we translate the word deen simply as religion, like a private, personal system of belief. But back in the very first Islamic state, Islam and government were completely intertwined. Deen didn't just mean religion. It denoted allegiance, political affiliation, and essentially carrying citizenship within that early political community.
So, building on that definition, changing your deen carried absolutely massive political weight. It wasn't just a personal shift in faith or some private theological pivot. In this historical context, as our sources brilliantly point out, it meant the severance of affiliation. It literally meant leaving al-Jamā'a, the political community. Basically, breaking your formal ties of citizenship to side with hostile enemies against the state.
Which brings us to Section 3, high treason versus belief, expanding the context through hadith.
Now, if changing your deen actually meant abandoning your political community, then suddenly we aren't talking about thought policing anymore, we're talking about state security. Check out this comparison. On one side, we have that broad hadith we started with, but compare it to this much more detailed hadith from the Messenger of Islam. Notice the absolutely crucial addition here. It doesn't just say abandoning the deen, it explicitly adds and secedes from al-Jamā'a, meaning the political community. The religious departure is inextricably linked here to political secession. And it goes deeper. Another highly specific record lays out the absolute strict limits on capital punishment, stating that blood is unlawful to shed except in 3 very specific cases. We have the married adulterer, legal retaliation for murder, and, here's the key one, a man who leaves Islam and wages war against Allah Almighty and His Messenger. The text explicitly ties the extreme punishment not to just leaving the faith, but to the physical act of waging war. That's high treason and violent rebellion, folks.
All right, Section 4, Voices of Classical Jurists, a millennium of nuanced debate.
Now you might be thinking, well, is this distinction between belief and treason just some modern attempt to sanitize history? Nope. Take a look at this timeline. This has actually been an active, super vibrant debate among leading classical jurists for over 1,000 years. Look at this. From 717 CE all the way to 1565 CE, giants of jurisprudence like al-Nakhaʿī and al-Thawrī were arguing that an apostate shouldn't be executed at all, but instead continually invited back to the faith. Forever, if necessary. Later scholars categorized it as a sin with no fixed ḥudūd, maybe just a discretionary temporal punishment. So for over a millennium, major voices were actively advocating for completely removing the death penalty for a mere change of faith.
This brilliantly illustrates the classical legal mind at work. This quote here is from al-Sarakhsi, a massive figure, highly renowned Hanafi jurist, who wrote a 32-volume legal epic. He explicitly stated that renunciation of the faith is a matter between man and his creator, and its punishment is postponed to the day of judgment, period. He firmly held that apostasy just does not qualify for temporal worldly punishment.
And that leads us to our final stop, Section 5, the modern consensus, treason, public security, and freedom of mind.
So, how do scholars of our current era synthesize all this history? Well, when you look at the prevailing consensus among heavyweights of 20th century scholarship, a really clear, unifying theme emerges. Scholars like Abu Zahra point out that early penalties were entirely political.
aimed strictly at active enemies. Muhammad Shaltut, the late Sheikh of Al-Azhar, emphasized that the Quran actually only mentions punishment in the hereafter for apostasy. And scholars like Al-Awa point out a completely fascinating historical fact. The Prophet never killed anyone solely for apostasy. Every single time it was tied to high treason. The historical penalties were rooted entirely in preventing sedition and defending public security, not in policing thought.
I want to pause here for a second because this quote just perfectly captures why all of this matters so much. The late Iranian scholar Murtaza Mutahhari used this incredibly relatable analogy. He said, "It is not possible to spank a child into solving an arithmetical problem. His mind and thought must be left free. The Islamic faith is something of this kind." Isn't that great? You can't force organic understanding through physical coercion. The mind has to be left free to genuinely grasp it. He argued that genuine faith and violent coercion are just fundamentally, logically incompatible.
So, I want to leave you with this question to chew on. Does distinguishing ancient high treason from personal belief fundamentally change how we understand the application of historical law today? We've just seen how deeply linguistic roots, political environments, and a literal millennium of debate can shape our understanding of a single sentence. It really challenges us to look way beyond the surface of any historical text and dig into the context, doesn't it? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you next time.